Margaret agus is mór na Northern bheith léirt an over Tovach show. I have to say my experience as a 15 and a 16-year-old of spending summers on the Gaeltacht in Naranmore in Donegal, I suppose like a lot of people brought up in cities and towns, particularly as I was in the centre of Dublin, was an amazing experience. And I've always, I have to say, viewed all the different islands that I've had the good fortune to spend time on subsequently as really, in a way, magical places. But I do know from my experience of talking to people on the different islands, both in a personal capacity when just visiting privately, but also as somebody involved in 3 different governments in the Department of Social Protection, that it is absolutely essential to resource the islands in a way that's adequate. And I feel the government is a little bit probably frightened of this motion, because it is quite an open motion and it does speak to the incredible linguistic and cultural heritage, but also as well to the potential of the islands now that we have a huge advances in technology, which means that the isolation of the islands, which was once such an elemental feature of island life, it doesn't have to happen in the way that it happened in the time of PEG. That if, in fact, there is investment, the islands can be an enormous resource for the islands and the islanders themselves, but also, I think, for the rest of Ireland and indeed for the rest of the world. And I actually think what this government often lacks is imagination to see the potential, and that as time changes, potential changes as well. I get the feeling from the government that in many ways they see the islands as a charge and a drag rather than as a positive opportunity. And really, in terms of biodiversity, they're an absolutely unique resource. We are in discussions, obviously, with the European Union and with the UN in terms of our international commitments in respect of various environmental plans. But in many ways, the islands are a major source in terms of biodiversity, whether you're talking about the fishing, whether you're talking about the actual biodiversity of the islands themselves. And I think the government really should have a little bit of bravery and actually seek to utilise the resource. What I do think is lacking, and really I think it is for the ministers with responsibility to have a little bit of courage and to afford structures for islanders to be able to be seriously involved in the plans for their islands. I have enough experience to know that every island is different. Every island has its own views of how it should be developed. And, the GAA have a very good slogan, give respect, get respect. I think the government should give respect to the islands, give respect to the people who live on the islands. As a lecturer in the DIT, now the Technical University of Dublin, I had many students from islands right, around the coast of Ireland. And the thing I think that was unique to almost all of those young people, many of whom for maybe 10, 15, 20 years, ended up living away from the island, some of them permanently, but others then went back at a different stage in their life, maybe to give their children an opportunity to experience the uniqueness of island life. And really what I think is lacking in the government is imagination for what? For the rest of Ireland, for our culture, for our history, for our biodiversity is a unique resource. And I think we should see it as that now. And the government may put up their hands and say, we don't have all the money at the moment. But it is possible to both create, maintain and resource community infrastructures that mean that people on the islands have a sense of empowerment, and that there is a connection between them and people in far-off big towns and cities, whether that's Letterkenny or whether that's Dublin or whether that's Cork. And, you know, there's been a huge growth now in different forms of tourism in Ireland, whether that's people walking or whether cycling or whatever. And the islands lend themselves to an awful lot of those really important modern tourism activities by people coming to the Wild Atlantic Way. And the Wild Atlantic Way has been a very successful concept. Now, of course, there are other islands right around the island. And I do think, though, that people on the islands require a sense that they are respected by the government and that their issues are important. And so I do support this motion. I do think that for islanders, for young people on the islands, the issue of education is absolutely important, because parents have the same ambition for their children doing whatever it is they want to do and achieving their best. Obviously, the islands have also tremendous resources in terms of fishing. And again, right around the coastline, we have fishing communities on the different islands or in the ports close to the islands. I just think that it is possible to draw up quite an exciting plan for the future of life on the islands. I think it is important as well in terms of the very difficult winter weather on a lot of the islands. Let's be honest, people like me tend to visit the islands when the weather is nice. And that's the experience of most people who live on the mainland. But with modern technology, with weatherproofing housing, with making sure that older people on the islands are resourced to improve their housing and to weatherproof their housing, it is possible to transform life on the islands. There are problems for older people in relation to medical services and the other services that people require. So, I mean, it is a taxing job for anybody in government to actually afford the support to the islands that they require to make them viable and to make them, in many ways, the jewel in the crown in terms of
Thank you, Deputy.
Quite a lot of visitors' experience in Ireland. So the Labour Party does support this motion. I think it's possible to actually envisage a very good future for the island. And let me say, in relation to Sherkin, on a recent visit to Sherkin, I thought the collaboration on Sherkin between the educational initiative there and the DIT, now the Technical University of Dublin, my own old college where I taught for many years, I think that's given tremendous opportunities to people in terms of education. And I would just urge the government to accept the motion and get on with doing the job.